I just had to let that play. I would wander around my house as a kid singing that song on loop. Hell, sometimes I wander around my house today singing that song on loop, at least to myself. I'm Eric J. Chucky, and welcome to Violent Profiles, where we discuss obscure fighting games and the rosters that define them. Clayfighter was a brilliant idea by Visual Concepts that masked the typical gory violence of its contemporaries behind a veneer of colorful, moldable, unkillable clay. That alone was enough to pique my interest personally, as I was so fascinated by clay as a kid. I often daydreamed of the fun figurines and art projects I could make from it, especially those colorful multi-packs they'd sell at the school book fairs. So that's a big check on the list of child me's interests. They also had a carnival theme, another big check. Mutants, check. Absurdist humor, check. Unique animation style, checks all across the board. There were a couple of other clay-based games out at this time, one even by Interplay. Others simply used claymation in their advertising, but yet none of them appealed to me quite as much as Clayfighter. I mean, look at this. Who could possibly get excited about playing this goalless fool? Later on, they even added some of my favorite cartoon voice actors in Clayfighter 63 and a third. But that's another story for another day. Today, we're focusing on the first two entries in the series, Clayfighter and C2 Judgment Clay. Both were Super Nintendo games, with the former receiving a Genesis port that was, for some reason, the version playable on the Wii Virtual Console. Maybe it had to do with the rebalancing that entry got. It certainly wasn't the graphics and sound. The simple backstory of Clayfighter is that a purple clay meteor hit Mudville right in their local abandoned carnival of Playland, turning it into Clayland and forging from the wreckage fierce warriors who would each wish to become king of the circus. A prestigious title, to be sure. Yeah. What more story could you possibly need from a game where Elvis can fight evil Laffy Taffy? Since we're also covering C2 Judgment Clay today, let's take a look at how its story expands on the gripping background narrative of the first. The mysterious purple clay meteor that I guess has just been sitting in Mudville for the last 3 years increases its emissions, flooding the land in a sea of rising clay. This is thanks in part to the nefarious mad scientist Dr. Kiln, who hopped out of a spacecraft that looked exactly like a prune Danish and shot a snot rocket at the meteor. No, I am not kidding. Once again, fighters rise to battle for supremacy, including Tiny, the canon winner of the previous tournament. Enough epic backstory, let's start with the cover boy and arguably most famous character in the franchise, Bad Mr. Frosty. Gaining clay-powered sentience apparently did a number on this once mild-mannered snowman's empathy and compassion, because now his only desire is for the harsh chill of winter to permeate everything, launching the world into a permanent ice age. If you beat Clayfighter with BMF... oh, I just got that.
You say this cat has a bad mother?
Shut your mouth.
I'm talking about
Bad Mr. Frosty!
Anyhow, if you win the original tournament with Frosty, he relocates Clayland to the North Pole and puts a certain overweight toy maker out of business, which is apparently somewhat canon even in the face of Tiny's victory, as his return in C2 says he just got off a maximum security iceberg for his assault on a Mr. S. Claus. Yet, in his ending in that game, it says that he becomes the head gift wrapper for the Mudville division of S. Claus and Company. Frosty has such a complicated relationship with this mysterious S. Claus character. I wonder if that ever gets resolved. Predictably, Frosty comes equipped with a vast array of snow and ice-themed moves, including a cold shoulder, which I feel has become an absolute staple of ice-themed fighters, and a Kano-style charging snowball attack. In C2, where Frosty trades his top hat for a 90s relevant backward cap, these moves are split between Bad Mr. Frosty and his even more evil counterpart, Ice. Much like the other clone fighters in this game, he doesn't have an explicit backstory, but when he wins, he gets an alternate ending where he bathes Mudville in Arctic wind and uses the locals as his personal skis. Why are these guys fighting? Why don't they team up? They seem like they'd get a lot more done if they worked together. One more note before we move on, the characters in the original Clayfighter have little rapid-fire facts in their bios, likes, hates, etc. Most of it isn't very interesting. Frosty hates heat and loves snow. His motto is chill out. During development, he had the gimmick of being a huge fan of pizza, which I have to imagine was removed because it seemed less like a personality trait and more like a weak parallel to another popular group of mutants in the 90s. The detail I find most curious is his listed job as snowplow. Playland was abandoned before the meteor hit. Has he gone out and sought employment somewhere between being granted sentience by the alien meteor and the King of the Circus tournament? If he loves everything being blanketed in snow so much, why is he willing to be paid to clear it away from places? Is he gathering it up for his eventual super blizzard? Or is his desire to cover the world in snow and ice just an extended scheme in ensuring he'll never be out of work? You know what, I'm thinking way too hard about the details of Clayfighter. Let's move on. Despite being the canon victor of the original tournament and thus the true king of the circus, Tiny was never a character who appealed to me. He was just a big, over-muscled dude in tiny pants and stupid boots who looked like Bald Bull had his head caved in with a crowbar. Changing his outfit colors in the first game only changed the color of his boots, and in the second game, while it changed the color of the tights as well, it also recolored his tongue.
No, sir, I don't like it.
His moves were also boring, with a charging left punch and a charging right punch. He had a Kano rolling ball move without the decency to have a top hat and carrot nose as part of it, and sort of a body splash anti-air, but his primary feature was how blisteringly hard he hit. He lost that in the second game, though his moves felt a bit more diverse in exchange. Tiny's story is just as simple. This Clayman loves wrestling, fighting, and his own muscles. He does not like thinking or people laughing at him. When he wins the original tournament, he turns Clayland into a wrestling gym and enforced a diet of broccoli and water on the citizens of Mudville. However, if victorious in the second tournament, he moves to the fast food world of Mud-Donald's, creating the new 100-pound buff burger that forces the eater to pump up their biceps while consuming it. I can't even be mad at this stupid ending. Look how happy he is to be selling his french fries. Tiny's evil C2 opposite number Butch is a dumber, oilier, and more flatulent counterpart. As much as I'm not huge on toilet humor in general, I appreciate a projectile being part of his offense, especially in C2 where Tiny himself just isn't as dominantly strong. If you win the game with Butch, he passes a law that prohibits anyone from being smarter than him, resulting in the exile of many varieties of farm-grown vegetables. I feel like this joke isn't quite fully fleshed out, but like all the other dupes, he has the same damn end slate as Tiny, and it has nothing to do with the text, so this is all the context we get. Another fun side note, Tiny's beta bio says he's married, which raises a host of questions, especially since he gets hitched to Helga in the version of events where she's victorious in the original Clayfighter. They even have 8 hyperactive children who become the best wrestlers in the history of opera. You might be wondering what the hell that means. See, Helga is a plus-size Viking woman who sings opera, which is a clumsy combination of idioms and obscure 90s stereotypes. I don't know why Playland had a Viking-themed opera as opposed to like one of those Norse-inspired longboat carnival rides, but here we are. As puzzling a bio as many of her fellow fighters, Helga is from the far north, and her Viking heritage supposedly grants her special powers from Thor and Odin, which, as you could assume, include, hitting people with her butt, and singing really loudly. Just like Thor. Helga is decent enough in gameplay, the main drawback that, much like Tiny, you have to look at her while you play as her. This is nothing against her size, I just think her render looks miserable. Look at the shine on her chest armor. It keeps disappearing in the last frame of her idle animation. Abominable. Helga never returned to the Clayfighter series after the first game, and I say good riddance to a bad joke. This is in contrast to another dated reference, obvious Elvis impersonator Blue Suede Goo, an aging circus freak granted delusions of grandeur and incredible powers by the meteor. In the original game, you fight him on this sweet piano level, the background for which is replaced in the tournament edition by a giant statue of what I can only assume is his O-face. Goo gives concerts from his porcelain throne, haha, that's how Elvis died, and apparently has a busy movie career despite, well, everything. Goo is one of those weird hand-me-down references like you'd see in Aladdin or Animaniacs. Kids back then would have no idea who Lawrence Welk was, for example, but the writers of the shows they watched did, and parodying him was a fun joke for the parents forced to watch alongside their Rugrats. In that way, my generation knows weird tidbits about the stars of yesteryear, hence an Elvis impersonator character in a game made 14 years after his death for an audience who wasn't around for the bulk of his career, if at all. And see, I wrote that, and I think it's good content, so I'm leaving it in, but the last year has proved me wrong about Elvis in rapid-fire succession. There was the highly successful Elvis movie, an Elvis impersonator bit on AEW, never mind my research bringing me to modern incarnations like Clownvis Presley, and the largest recorded gathering of impersonators happening in July of 2014 with 895 Elvi in attendance. So I stand corrected. Elvis lives on more than just a piece of toast. This incarnation of the enduring icon has some pretty decent attacks, using his hair as a weapon to cut his opponent in half, and launching music note projectiles that can inflict multiple hits. If he meets his destiny and becomes the king, he moves the carnival to Las Vegas and takes up residency, raising hound dogs and entertaining the crowd. That is, until he mysteriously vanishes and is never seen again, outside of the occasional sighting of him in grocery stores across the nation. As much of an obvious joke as that is, they never did bring Goo back to the Clayfighter roster, and I think that's kind of a shame.
Elvis has left the building.
Speaking of Clownvis, being a game based in a circus, Clayfighter also has a resident clown, Bonker.
Yeah, totally nuts.
No, not him, this guy. Snoozing under the big top when the meteor landed, Bonker became as hard as clay, which I don't believe is an improvement over, bones, and now uses his hilarious tricks to put the hurt on his opponents. So as you can expect, we get pies, squirting flowers, and cartwheels. Bonker also has mad hops, and being able to mix up the height of his projectiles can make him frustrating to predict. Beat the game with Bonker, and he blows all the prize money, there's prize money, on cream pies and squirting flowers, then just hangs around the circus doing the same old, I kind of admire that. The man clearly loves clowning, so why would he stop? You do you, you terrible clay clown. Another fighter who skipped C2, but we'll talk about again in a later episode, is Ichabod Clay. Probably my personal favorite among the bunch, the spooky specter who thinks the nighttime is the right time, was given substance by the Clay meteor and uses his newfound body to torment the souls of Mudville. Other than his sweet Halloween aesthetics, the thing that made me a big fan of Ichabod was his solid moveset, with decent reach, a fireball, a shoryuken, and a teleport. Beat the game with him and you'll replace the staff of the circus with ghosts, which is a lot more tame than I would expect from an angry poltergeist given physical form, since what folks like Bad Mr. Frosty wish to accomplish is so much worse. Similarly, Taffy's only goal in Clayfighter is to take control of the circus for his fellow candy beings, shut down the food stalls, and put on the best damn show a sapient glob of saltwater Taffy could manage. I really like Taffy because he has such a unique design you couldn't see outside of a game like Clayfighter. He's got the reach you'd expect from a guy made out of stretchy candy, but his special moves are a little underwhelming in that they're just a number of dashes. He does have one interesting technique which allows him to fake being stunned in order to lure in your unwitting opponent. I'm not sure how useful this is in practice, but it's a neat idea. It's an utter shame Taffy wasn't brought back in C2, but someone who was that occupies an equally impressive creative space is series mainstay Blob. What some have called lazy character design in the past is one of the most simple yet ingenious concepts for this cart in particular. It's a game about clay. He's a living blob of amorphous clay who can turn into anything. And not in the lame shapeshifter way you might fear, where he doesn't have moves of his own and just copies everybody else's.
Your soul is mine.
He turns into a boot, or a bunch of boxing gloves, a chopping hand, stretches his eyes out to hit you, becomes a rocket ship or a buzzsaw. Lots of cool creative ideas that made Blob a blast to play. When Blob wins the tournament and becomes king of the circus, he discovers he isn't just radioactive goo, he's a life form from Clayterion, the origin of the meteor. He returns home and opens a circus there, bringing his knowledge of tent-based entertainment to amuse a brand new audience. In C2, he decides to terraform the Earth by sitting on it and making it really flat. That's stupid. His yellow-toothed evil twin Slick is even more underwhelming as he feels entitled to eat every building he can find, ending with a bad joke about finding an appropriately sized doggy bag for his leftovers. Dumb. So that's it for the original Clayfighter crew, save for the final fight, N-Boss. He's a big string of clay pearls that throws every projectile in the game at you, and that's about it. Once he's defeated, you never see him again in the series. No intro, no outro, just fight these circles, I got nothing. The best one can manage is the pun of N-Boss sounding like End Boss and being similar to M. Bison, which is not good. Our standards were somewhat lower in the 90s. Before we move on fully to C2, I'd like to note that from Clayfighter to the Tournament Edition, aside from some mechanical tweaks, the biggest thing they changed were the backgrounds, and almost all of them are startlingly worse than the originals. This is a baffling decision to me, as the style seems to carry over to Judgment Clay, with every arena being noisy and off-putting in the way the original stages largely weren't. Especially this back alley with a confusing perspective featuring a giant baby gang. Ugh. Each fighter also has fewer moves, even if a lot of the original Clayfighter ones were redundant, and their normals are less fun to hit and less inspired than the previous entry. C2 is a hard downgrade, despite some of the exciting character ideas in it, and I'm very glad my mom never tried to track down this game and purchase it for me in my younger days, despite my frequent pleas. On the topic of giant babies, one of the newcomers to C2 is Goo Goo, a giant clay baby. Though I theorize that this isn't an actual baby and just an adult clay person with a diaper fetish, being as he's described as being good at pool, swearing up a storm, and flirting with every female he can find. Maybe it's a baby Herman bit, I don't know. I hate it, whatever it is. This horrible baby throws bottles, crawls really fast, and hits you with his rattle, a giant spiked mace. If you beat the game with him, I like you less as a person, and he institutes government-endorsed nap time, which makes everyone in Mudville much happier, though the loud snoring becomes a problem. The other resident upsettingly adult baby/grown man in a diaper, Spike, ironically has a less rattle-focused moveset with a spinning dash, a flying butt bump, and a move where he screams at his opponent, which I think is supposed to work like Blanca's electricity, but only ever cause my opponent to heck all the way off. He also throws up a little bit as one of his regular attacks, and if you beat the game with him, he demands all the milk in Mudville, but doesn't drink it fast enough. So now he has 1,000 pounds of cottage cheese, and God, I want to throw up over this whole business. Let's move swiftly along to something far less disgusting, the surprisingly endearing Kangoo. Boxing kangaroos were kind of a thing back in the day, but Kangoo has the delightful distinction of being a reluctant fighter. She hates seeing the sight of spilled clay, tries to fix her opponents up after the match, and even closes her eyes during the onslaught. She wouldn't even be fighting, but those who have seen her throw down threaten to kick her ass if she didn't enter the tournament. Personally, my money's on her fans. As much as I like Kangoo's attitude, not her stage though, that looks like the Land of Confusion video on acid. Her incredibly short range and underwhelming specials make her difficult to use, and her damage output isn't really compensated for because of it. It's just as well, if you beat the game with her, she donates the title belt, there was a title belt, and her opponent to the local museum. Her counterpart Thunder isn't much better, though she has a bit more reach with her normals. Win the tournament with this mysterious kangaroo, and she rules Mudville with an iron fist, forcing lawbreakers to live in her pouch for 3 months with a stale shellfish. You can see why that's stupid, right? Like, it's not even a joke. And also, what happens if more than one person breaks the law in the span of 3 months? Why am I still overthinking Clayfighter lore? Nanaman is only a step higher in terms of reach and skill. His biggest asset is a slice of banana hurled as a projectile, which does a fair amount of damage, and having a dashing sweep as his crouching normal kicks. Unfortunately, he is a Jamaican banana who doesn't even have the good nature to look like a Jamaican banana. He's lazy, loves relaxing, and drinking mudaritas, so it's no surprise when he wins the tournament he turns the whole of Mudville into a tropical resort, and dresses like the lady who used to be on the Chiquita banana stickers. Dear God, this whole character was just a build-up to that joke, wasn't it? If you're expecting something better from Dr. Peelgood, you'll be delighted to know his banana slice throw briefly cuts the opponent in half, and dismayed to discover his victory results in him demanding all the banana peels in Mudville, so everyone is always slipping on stuff. Let's try to close this one on a pair of high notes, starting with Octohead, an octopus monster who spins around and is probably one of the more enjoyable melee-focused characters to play in C2. He's also one of the most visually appealing. While there's not much to his backstory of being a surfing party animal, his design makes up for it. If you win with Octohead, he turns Mudville into a 24/7 beach party scene. If you prefer the nefarious Jack, you'll enjoy a dashing bite attack that's pretty satisfying to land, and when he becomes the Grandmaster of Mudville, he decides he wants the ocean to himself and evicts all the other sea creatures. The town's denizens are left confused as to what to do with their sudden influx of homeless fish, which is probably the best joke in any of the C2 endings. Finally, we have Hoppy, the Arnold Schwarzenegger rabbit XP who likely inspired the game's name parodying Terminator 2. Or perhaps it was the other way around. You name your game C2 Judgment Clay, you need an Arnold among your roster. Thankfully, he lands as the most satisfying character to play, with a decent carrot projectile and the most useful Shoryuken. His backstory is an unplumbable joke that I don't get about how he talks to his muscles in order to get them to grow. His ending involves him making motorcycles the official vehicle of Mudville, and his art looks the least like a claymation figure of any member of the roster, but being fun to play is more important than any of that. I can't say the same for his more hyperactive twin Sarge. Lacking a projectile, even a more diverse set of punches and kicks can't save him from being violently underwhelming against block-happy opponents. Or even worse, those who can fling something from across the screen. Also a motorcycle enthusiast, in his ending, Sarge straps a jet engine onto his chopper and flies off the road, landing on the nose of a 747. And that's it. C2 doesn't have any unique bosses, just the evil twins who are unlockable via code inputs on the menu screen. There was a character who was sculpted but never implemented into the game, Lucy the ballerina gorilla. I like her design, and I'm curious to see how she would have turned out, but that's gonna have to remain a mystery for the ages. The Clayfighter franchise has had a troubled life with a number of false start reboots, and while I'd love to live long enough to see one of them finally take shape, I won't be surprised if another sequel never does. Eventually we'll take a look at the 63 1/3 reboot and its infamous Sculptor's Cut, but until then I think I've had enough half-baked jokes to last me until at least 2024. Next time on Violent Profiles, we'll explore a much smaller roster for, if you can believe it, an even worse game. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and support us on Patreon at the $10 tier to get new episodes a month early. Shout out to all the names currently on screen for doing exactly that. Until next time, white out.